At the heart of Michael Harper's story is a crushing injustice, a respected prosecutor sentenced by the very system he once protected. Judge Edward Gaynell embodies the conflict, racing to punish without seeing the truth behind Michael's dedication, leaving everyone questioning his motives. When revelations and courageous advocacy expose the judge's mistake, the fate of both men changes in a single, unforgettable moment. This gripping courtroom drama delivers a powerful reversal, where justice finally prevails. Prepare for a finale that restores faith in the truth. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the frosted windows of the Atlanta courthouse, painting pale streaks across worn wooden benches and adding a deceptive sense of warmth to the solemn room. In the hallway, muted conversations carried hints of uncertainty and apprehension, a chorus of voices that fell silent when Judge Edward Gaynell strode in. His gaze swept the courtroom with practiced detachment, pausing briefly at the defendant's table before settling on his docket. Michael Harper sat quietly, his composure masking the turmoil building within. Years of hard work had earned him respect as a diligent and principled prosecutor, but that morning he was cast in a different role, defendant in a case that threatened to erase the legacy he'd built. Dressed in a crisp suit, shoulders squared against invisible pressure, Michael studied the faces in the courtroom. His mother sat in the second row, her hands tightly folded in her lap and her lips pressed together in an anxious line. Close friends and former colleagues filled several seats nearby, carrying a mixture of disbelief and guarded hope. The bailiff called the session to order, and the room shifted from uneasy anticipation to rigid attention. The prosecution outlined their case with calculated efficiency, referencing documents and testimonies that framed Michael as reckless and corrupt. Their language avoided overt hostility, but each phrase seemed calibrated to strip away his professional dignity. As arguments were presented, the judge maintained a facade of neutrality, but in his clipped responses to defense requests, a sense of impatience grew more apparent. Michael's attorney, Jason Pierce, pushed forward with a strategy built on logic and empathy, highlighting Michael's years of service and the flimsy foundation of the accusations. Yet every time Jason delivered a point, the judge redirected or dismissed it with curt language. Questions about evidence were answered with references to precedent. Appeals for mercy were redirected toward the supposed severity of the alleged breach. Michael felt as if he were standing at the edge of a pit, each word from the judge nudging him closer. Testimony from witnesses was vivid but not comforting. Character references attempted to illustrate Michael's integrity. Teachers recalled his work in community youth programs. Neighbors spoke of evenings he spent providing legal guidance to families in need. The prosecutor countered with facts and timelines, a late-night email here, a questionable document there. In the process, Michael's story became tangled in ambiguity, and the perspective of those who knew him was outshone by official records and interpretations. Each new detail presented by the prosecution seemed specifically chosen to amplify doubt and undermine trust. A sense of unease spread through the courtroom. Some watched the judge's reactions, searching for signs of fairness in the tight lines around his mouth. Michael's mother's worry deepened as the case wore on. She pressed her hands together so tightly her knuckles whitened, silently willing the day to reverse itself. A former colleague, Susan, kept her gaze on the table, afraid that eye contact might betray her own disbelief. The courtroom, usually a place of reason and clarity, felt instead like a stage for unseen forces. By midday, tension escalated. Michael was called to the stand, his pulse quickening as all eyes turned toward him. He spoke with restraint, offering a measured account of decisions and events, pausing when emotion threatened to overpower. The judge's tone sharpened, framing questions to restrict rather than reveal. Michael's words, clear and deliberate, seemed to dissipate into the room without leaving a mark. Before closing argument, Jason Pierce pleaded for the judge to consider Michael's consistent record of honesty. He reminded the court of the many times Michael had chosen the harder path, refusing shortcuts and shielding the vulnerable. The judge listened but did not respond, lost in thoughts only he could follow. When the sentence was pronounced, 10 years, no parole, the silence was crushing. The sound of the gavel was as final as a locked door. Michael blinked as reality set in, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. His mother stifled a sob, clutching her purse for comfort. Friends and colleagues slumped in their seats, overtaken by frustration and disbelief. In that moment, the courtroom no longer felt like a sanctuary for truth. It was a place where stories were flattened, where possibility disappeared behind procedure. The verdict echoed in Michael's mind, cold and unyielding, a sentence handed down not only to him, but to every hope he had carried into the room. No one spoke as he was led away. The world outside the courthouse was unchanged, but inside all sense of justice had been quietly surrendered. After the verdict, the courthouse emptied quickly, the echo of footsteps fading into the quiet hush that filled the hallways. Alone in his chambers, Judge Edward Gaynell sat at his desk, surrounded by files that seemed heavier than ever. He reached for his reading glasses, but paused, unable to focus on the words. The weight of the morning's events pressed down on him, leaving a persistent ache that lingered in the room. A single sheet of paper lay on top of the stack, a memo intended for internal review. It was marked with the name Michael Harper, lead prosecutor, and an old case number tied to a significant corruption trial. Gaynell's hand trembled, fingers hovering uncertainly over the page. Through a haze of memory, he recalled Harper's role in the investigation years earlier. Back then, Michael had worked long hours, uncovering evidence that had protected the integrity of the court and solidified Gaynell's own reputation. That memory collided with the image of the young man in handcuffs, and the contrast stung deeply. Outside, rain began to tap against the window. The sound was steady and persistent, amplifying the melancholy tone of the afternoon. Gaynell considered how nothing in the courtroom that day had felt resolved. He thought of Michael's mother, her silent hope, and how quickly it had faded. He remembered each interruption, each dismissive gesture, and the way Michael had struggled to speak. Regret crept through Gaynell's mind, growing sharper with every recalled moment. This was not just legal procedure, it was a series of human choices, each with consequences that extended far beyond the legal documents now scattered across the desk. Night crept in, and the judge's chambers grew colder. Judge Gaynell remained lost in thought, the noise of the rain sometimes broken by quick flashes of recollection. He remembered a time when justice felt clear, when cases seemed like puzzles waiting to be solved. Now, looking back on his decisions, he felt the absence of certainty. The law was meant to be impartial, but his own reflections exposed how easily the truth could be clouded. Michael's determination lingered with Gaynell, a steady reminder of what had been lost. The judge struggled with questions he would not voice to anyone. Had he truly listened? Did his actions serve justice or merely reinforce routine? Each question brought renewed heaviness, as Gaynell realized how even a single verdict could change the shape of many lives. Days passed, but the judge's thoughts never quieted. He reviewed memos, letters, and case notes, each detail reminding him that justice was forged not just by evidence, but by empathy and understanding. Regret grew with each hour, coloring Gaynell's perception of the courthouse and its rituals. He saw, in the silence of his office, the edges of humanity that were sometimes overlooked in pursuit of resolution. For Michael, the aftermath was equally burdened. Waking in a holding cell, he stared at the ceiling and revisited every step that had led him to this point. He remembered younger ambitions, the sense of responsibility when he took on his first cases, and the belief that law could enact good. Those beliefs now felt distant, and the quiet of the cell forced him to examine every moment, every exchange. Michael wondered how his reputation could unravel so quickly, how his intent to serve had been reinterpreted as wrongdoing. He thought often of his mother's face as the verdict was read, her silent heartbreak, and the faith she had always carried for him. He recalled conversations with colleagues, words of encouragement that now seemed out of reach. He wondered whether his years of service held meaning in the eyes of those who had watched, powerless to intervene. In the courthouse, the staff carried on with daily routines. Secretaries filed papers. Bailiffs prepared for the next session. But beneath the surface, a subtle tension lingered. Many remembered Michael Harper's case, and as the days passed, his story became a muted topic in private conversations. Some questioned the fairness of the verdict. Others struggled with a sense of helplessness. The walls of the courthouse seemed to echo with lingering hope for change, born out of regret and reflection. Judge Gainell's solitude deepened, and regret became a companion, present in every echo of rain and rustle of paper. He wondered whether justice truly belonged to the impartial, or whether it sometimes required an honest reckoning with one's own humanity. In that quiet, with only the rain for comfort, Gainell understood that the story had not really ended. The truth remained, waiting to be acknowledged. Atlanta buzzed with its usual energy, but beneath the calm surface, the echoes of Michael Harper's sentencing refused to fade. Conversations in office corridors, busy cafes, and even on local radio stations circled back to the trial. The verdict, delivered with such finality, had unsettled the very foundation of trust in the city's legal system. Jason Pierce, not content to let injustice settle, approached his work with relentless drive. Each morning, he walked into his small but crowded office, greeted by stacks of case files and a growing number of emails from concerned citizens. He spent hours on the phone with technical experts, reviewing timestamp data from security cameras and cross-checking alibi details, sometimes losing himself in the details but always finding fresh determination as he uncovered more inconsistencies. Community action intensified. Advocacy groups once focused on neighborhood issues rallied for a transparent review of Michael's trial. Supporters created petitions, organized peaceful demonstrations, and shared regular updates across social media platforms. People who had never met Michael added their voices to online threads calling for justice, believing that what had happened in the courthouse could happen to any dedicated citizen. Inside the courthouse, routines continued, but an unspoken tension shaped the days. Secretaries lingered in the hallways, glancing at news articles on their phones between tasks. Senior attorneys dropped by Jason's office, offering moral support or passing along rumors they'd heard about missing pieces of evidence. Michael's former supervisor quietly passed Jason a USB drive. Inside were archived emails, calendar records, and fragments from internal memos pieces that, when assembled, suggested mistakes in the prosecution's timeline. As Jason built his appeal, his team grew. Law students volunteered, organizing documents and highlighting key dates in color-coded spreadsheets. Each breakthrough was celebrated quietly, usually a late-night text chain, a short sigh of relief before the next challenge arose. The process was exhaustive. They reconstructed the night of the alleged offense by the minute, overlaying phone records, badge swipes, and digital logs until a new, clearer narrative emerged. Local journalists kept pace with the investigation. Documentarians pitched stories to streaming services, hoping to shine a light on the broader issue. Online, Michael's situation was discussed across forums. Legal podcasts debated the implications of judicial bias and the ripple effect of a rushed verdict. A new hearing was set. On that day, voices filled every hallway of the courthouse, a mosaic of lawyers, students, activists, and everyday residents. The air pulsed with anticipation, the kind that precedes turning points. As Jason presented his findings to the presiding judge, every detail was substantiated with data and witness statements. He pointed out inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline, brought forward new testimony from colleagues who had worked late that same evening, and explained how digital records contradicted official statements. Judge Edward Gainell, summoned to testify, faced a room dense with unspoken questions. His voice was quieter than before, marked by pauses for reflection. He explained the pressure of backlog, the distraction of legacy cases, and how, in the push to proceed, he had allowed routine and assumption to overshadow careful review. Each word was received with the kind of silence that signals deep consideration. Across the room, Michael watched the proceedings with steady composure. He understood that trust broken so quickly would take time to rebuild, and redemption would not be granted by a single signature. Even so, he sensed the energy shifting. Facts were being acknowledged, doubts given air, voices gaining strength. Reporters crafted careful narratives, refusing sensationalism in favor of honesty. Families who knew Michael felt hope stir once again. Jason closed the hearing with a focused appeal, calling for a verdict that would honor not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of justice that Michael had always lived by. The judge's final words did not resolve the case outright, but emphasized the importance of truth in every decision. The hearing adjourned with an atmosphere of collective anticipation, a city waiting for proof that its courts could admit mistakes, correct injustices, and set a new precedent for process and integrity. In the days that followed, those present carried the story forward. Students debated it in classrooms, professionals referenced it in board meetings. The courthouse for once was not just a symbol of decisions, it became the heart of a movement pulsing with the possibility of renewal and the promise that what happened to Michael Harper would not be forgotten. The courthouse was washed in gentle morning light as the final hearing gathered people from every corner of the city. There was an air of anticipation and reflection. No one entered the room simply to witness a legal decision, but to see whether the system itself could honor truth over routine. Michael Harper sat at his attorney's table, surrounded by supporters whose loyalty had carried him through many difficult days. Their quiet optimism filled the space, contrasting with the uncertainty that had once shadowed every hour. The judge, after careful review of new evidence and heartfelt testimony, spoke clearly and decisively. All charges against Michael Harper were dismissed. The words seemed almost understated, but their impact rippled through the courthouse. Michael did not leap for joy. He simply allowed his relief to settle slowly, understanding that this vindication had come at the end of a long, weary journey. His friends and colleagues shared quiet nods and comforting smiles, recognizing the gravity of what had been restored. Judge Edward Gainell, who had presided over the first trial, notified the staff of his resignation earlier that morning. In a brief public message, he described his regret and personal growth, admitting that he had allowed pressure and habit to cloud his judgment. His words were measured, focusing not on his legacy, but on the hope that others would learn from his mistake. As he walked out for the last time, the courthouse halls felt the presence of a lesson learned. Michael remained in that room longer than most, absorbing the details, the familiar woodwork, the worn benches, the echoes of past cases. He thanked Jason Pierce, his attorney and former protege, whose tireless work had uncovered the truth. Reporters approached for comment, but Michael limited his words to gratitude and reflection. He spoke about forgiveness and the importance of fairness, mentioning the need to keep institutions accountable and urging everyone to see those in the justice system as human first. As he returned to work in the following weeks, Michael prioritized programs that fostered oversight and transparency. He met with young attorneys, emphasizing empathy and vigilance, teaching the value of recognizing one's own bias and fighting for justice even when the path was uncertain. Slowly he rebuilt his life, not chasing public recognition but dedicating himself to helping others avoid the struggles he had endured. Community groups cited his journey in debates about legal reform. Law schools discussed ethics and the importance of humility, drawing on Michael's experience to refine curricula. Advocacy organizations referenced his ordeal while lobbying for improvements in appeals processes, hoping to address errors and validate stories like Michael's. Every conversation and project seemed imbued with renewed urgency, proof that one hard-won victory could inspire deeper change. Privately, Michael found time to reflect. He walked through the city, remembering moments when hope had seemed lost, and considered how the support of others had changed everything. His resolve deepened, marked not by triumph but by understanding. He kept in touch with the people who had stood by him, often offering encouragement to those still waiting for their own justice. Years later, the memory of Michael Harper's case became a touchstone for institutional reform. People's faith in the law, shaken by the initial verdict, was slowly rebuilt. The legal community practiced greater transparency and accountability, turning its attention to fairer trials and the importance of revisiting past errors. Michael's resilience and Jason's advocacy inspired others to challenge injustice and support those whose voices wavered under the burden of doubt. Ultimately, Michael's story was more than a reversal of fortune. It became a reminder that every courtroom decision shapes not only individual lives, but the vitality and integrity of the entire justice system. Citizens, lawyers, and judges alike took away a lasting lesson. Truth and compassion are the foundation of lasting progress, and hope grows stronger every time fairness is chosen over convenience.